minute or so because I've just got a message. Someone's just waiting to join. Okay, I think they've joined because the number's gone up. Okay, so we'll begin. So thank you everybody for joining. Welcome to a wine talk on La Rioja and a little bit of a tasting. Of course, you're doing your own tasting if you've got wine with you. If you've got a bottle of Rioja, even better. If you don't, any wine will do. If you don't have any wine with you, go and get some quickly. So just a little bit about me first. I know most of you know me, but I know there's a couple of people joining that don't. I wanted to work, or would like to work in wine, but the pandemic and COVID put a stop to that, or a brief stop to that, hopefully. So this is a way of just keeping my toes in and doing something in the wine world. I have a level 3 from the WSET. I took that in August 2019 in the school in London, which was really good fun. And the presentation or the talk will only last roughly sort of half an hour, 45 minutes or so. Okay, so everyone's on. So please use the, oh good, I can see people joining now. Please use the chat bar if you want to send any messages or ask any questions. I'll try my best to answer any questions as well. Okay, the first thing is a part of the tasting. Many of you would have done wine tasting before, but for those of you that haven't, then you can have a little look at this diagram here. There are 4 things when it comes to tasting wine. And the first thing that we look at is the color of the wine. So sometimes people like to hold it up against a piece of paper, a piece of white paper to see the color, or just by holding it up to the light will give you a good indication of color. Okay. When you're looking at color of wine, the best thing to do is to look through the wine glass and see whether you can see the bottom of the glass. And that will tell you the color intensity of the wine. You will be able to see how intense that wine is through its color. Okay, so if you just look down into the wine glass, if you can see the bottom of the wine glass and you can see the sort of base of the wine glass, then you've got a much thinner wine than if you've got a full heavy-bodied wine, then you won't be able to see the bottom or see your fingers. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is look at the wine. The next thing we do is we take a smell of the wine. So if you've got wine in front of you now, what I'd like to do is just take a sniff without doing anything. Just sniff the wine as if you're sniffing a flower, okay? And that's it. You should be able to smell something, but not loads of aromas are coming out to you, I'm guessing. So what you need to do next is to swivel your wine around in the glass if you've poured too much, and that's greedy. So swivel the wine around in the glass, because what you are doing here is you are opening out those aromas and they are releasing themselves, and therefore you're now going to be able to smell the wine in a much more professional and better way. So now take another big sip after swirling the wine around in the glass, and hopefully you should be able to smell a lot more than you smelt on the first time, because you really opened up the wine. Often we talk about wine being closed, sometimes because it's been stored or aged in bottle, and therefore when the wine's closed, we need to open that wine out to release all of those flavor compounds. So if you're drinking Rioja, have a think about what you can smell there. I'm not going to go through that yet because that comes onto that later, but have a think about the smells that you've got. If you're drinking a white wine, again, think about the smells that you've got for white wine. The next thing to do is taste. Now, there's going to be 2 tastings like we did with the smelling. So the first thing I want you to do is just take a sip of the wine as if it's a glass of water. I can see Paul's put his cork broke, and we've got Joe with Corey watching, and a bottle of milk. Oh, we can do milk tasting. So pretend it's just a sip of milk first, and don't think too much of it. Now, that's how we normally taste wine, and that's absolutely fine. When we're at a wine bar, that's how we would be tasting the wine. Now, if you want to taste it professionally, or you want to taste it to judge the wine, or you want to make an assumption or a conclusion on this wine, whether you're going to buy a case of it or whether you're going to invest in it or whatever, you need to take a proper long taste. And to do that, the trick is to hold the wine in your mouth for as long as possible. When the wine goes into your mouth, you're not just going to hold it there. You need to swish it around the mouth. You need to chuck it from side to side, from cheek to cheek. And particularly with red wines, if you're on red Rioja, is to use your tongue to wipe the front of your mouth, your gums and your teeth. If you wipe it around there to really coat your teeth with wine, you're going to taste a completely different wine to what you just tasted, okay? So we can all do that as well. I'll do it, but obviously I won't be able to speak when I'm doing that. And swallow. Wow. Now you can taste the wine, okay? If you are salivating at the end there, which you all should be, because if you can really tell that wine's got good acidity. The coating in your teeth, that's going to have that really strong taste. It's going to feel quite bitter. It might feel quite coarse in your mouth. Here you're feeling tannins on the sides of your cheeks as well. You'll also be feeling some tannins on the sides. The weight on the tongue is going to be the body of the wine. And we're also then looking out for that finish. Can we still taste the wine once it's gone down? And the longer that you can taste that wine, the longer the finish of the wine. Now, I've stopped salivating after my sip. I felt loads of tannins on my front teeth, but they're kind of slowing down now. I could feel my kind of face getting warm. That's probably the alcohol concentration there. The finish is still there. It's got a long finish. Now, if all of these things are playing together with the acidity, the tannins, the weight of the wine, the finish, then we've got a well-balanced wine. And that is something we're always looking for, is balance. So making sure when you're tasting your wine that you're not just left salivating and trying to, your tongue is producing more saliva. You don't want to keep doing that because it might be too acidic. The acidity will be too high in the wine. You don't want to feel the tannins and the coating on your mouth for too long after, because otherwise you haven't got that balanced wine. And the final thing is conclude. Do you like it or not? And that's the main thing. And the thing with wine tasting is somebody can sell you wine and tell you that it's the best wine in the world. But at the end of the day, if you like it, that is the main thing. And if you don't like it, just be honest with yourself, be honest and say that it's not your style of wine for whatever reason. Okay, don't worry if you don't like something at all. Just seeing if any comments. Oh, yeah, so pleased you're not asking us to spit. You can spit as well if you're tasting lots and lots of wines in one go. Then obviously you can spit as well. Now, all from the smell and the taste there, you will be able to tell pretty much everything you need to know about the wine. You don't need to finish the whole bottle. In professional wine tasting, you don't even need to spit it to be able to tell the finish of the wine, the alcohol, etc. But most of the characteristics of the wine you can take from actually the smell. And that leads me on to the next chart. This is huge. You don't have to worry too much about this chart here, but it's just showing you all the different possible flavor characteristics of wine. And we talk about wine flavors and we talk about wine tasting in 3 stages: primary, secondary, and tertiary. 1, 2, 3. Our primary are all our fruit characteristics that we take from the wine. And that's from the vineyard and from the growing of the grapes themselves. That could be, and the influences will be dependent on the weather, the positioning of the vines, but also the locations of the vineyards as well. So just picking out some red fruits, for example, because we're all on, if we're drinking Rioja, cranberries, red plums, pomegranates, sour cherries, strawberries, cherries, raspberries. Some of you on a different style of Rioja will be having some more black fruits, plums and blackberries, that kind of thing. If you're on white wine this evening, you'll be on the citrus part of the diagram, so lemons and limes most certainly, And then tree fruits or stone fruits, so your peaches, your apricots, you'll be tasting as well or smelling. And then your tropical fruit. If you go to a hotter climate, you're likely to get more tropical fruit. So pineapples, mangoes, kiwis, guava, even bananas as well. So there are primary characteristics. Our secondary characteristics come from the aging process in the vineyard, in the winery. So when our winemaker decides how he's going to elaborate that wine, he may use cork, for example. So he may put the wine into barrels, cork, oak. So you put them into oak barrels, and therefore you're going to have some aging. And then they are your secondary characteristics, and you're going to be tasting more sort of mushroomy flavors, truffle flavors. You're going to be tasting cream and butter if we're talking about a white wine and Chardonnay. And then our third or tertiary also falls into general aging and further aging in barrels or bottles as well. So we're going to get much more of the leather aromas, as well as cocoa, coffee, tobacco, that kind of thing. And some of you, with your Rioja, depending on what you've got, will start to have that leather. You might have some tobacco, some sort of smokiness to the wine as well, or you might just have some general oak flavors coming through, so cedar and things like that coming through. Okay, that's enough with the tasting. Let's move on to La Rioja. First thing I want you to do, if you've got a bottle of La Rioja, is to look at the back of the bottle, and you should have a label, a printed label. That's the wine producer's label. Look below that, and there should be a label with the logo of Rioja on it. Just have a note at what color Rioja is in. It should either be in green, red, purple, or blue. If you don't have a label at the bottom and you're drinking a Rioja, then you're drinking a counterfeit, which I'm sure none of you are. If you're not drinking Rioja, then you won't have that at the bottom. It's specific to Rioja. We're going to talk about that later, but I just want you to have a look at that color and just bear that color in mind. So La Rioja is situated right in the north of Spain, but sort of centrally. So if you can see it on the screen, it's sort of north of Madrid, and then slightly higher to the right, you can see La Rioja. It's approximately 2-hour drive from Bilbao. So if you're going to the Basque region of Spain, it's only a couple of hours in the car and well worth driving down. And it sits along the Ebro River, which if you can see it running right through La Rioja. That river has a real influence on the wines and also the regions as well. It kind of separates the regions in Rioja as well. There is also a mountain range from the Cantabrian mountain range. I'm just looking at comments on the screen as well over there. They're a very small mountain range. They're called the Sierra Cantabria. And what they do is they hold all the clouds and they stop all the clouds hanging over the wine valley of Rioja. So they are really key for Rioja winemaking. If anybody's been to that part of Spain, they know they do get a lot of rainfall as well. So having the Rioja wine protected from the clouds and the rain is really helpful with the wine. We don't want to drench the grapes all year round. There are approximately 65,000 hectares in Rioja. That's over 161,000 acres. There are over 16,000 vineyards and 700 wineries. So that's quite a lot for not a huge region. They produce approximately 66 million gallons of wine every year. That's 66 million gallons, mostly red. Rioja dates back way back. Written evidence suggests it goes back to 873. They were making wine in La Rioja, so very old indeed. And the key thing about Rioja to notice, and due to its success, is the location of it. Like with most vineyards, La Rioja is positioned near enough to the Bay of Biscay and to the Atlantic. So where we've got our high altitude vineyards, that's going to have a really cooling effect in La Rioja. But if we go further down La Rioja, you also can see we've got the Mediterranean influence coming in from Barcelona inland, and that also affects the wine of La Rioja as well. It's about 65 miles long as a region and 25 miles wide. So in terms of wine regions, it's not huge. It's split easily into three parts, and these are the three districts of La Rioja that you need to know. The first is Rioja Alta, which you can see is in the sort of beige color. Rioja Alta in English means high Rioja. So therefore we can expect a lot of elevation, a lot of vineyards are up on slopes. So that's approximately, most of them are sort of 300 meters above sea level. So quite high in Rioja Alta. And that has a real influence, and the Atlantic there has that real influence as well on those vineyards. I'm going to go down then to Rioja Baja, which is in that sort of browny orange color. If this works. Yeah, there we go. Rioja Baja is its traditional name, but anyone that speaks Spanish, I know a few of you do, will know that Baja means low. And it's only low because of it's not as high as Rioja Alta. So Rioja Baja it sits further down in the valley. But the word low in Spanish, they didn't like it referring to wine as being low because it could be reflective of the quality. And it's the biggest region of La Rioja, and often you get a lot of wine from there. A lot of sort of mass-produced wine comes from Rioja Baja. That doesn't mean it's the worst region. So anyway, they've moved away from Rioja Baja, and we're not allowed to call it that anymore. And it's called Rioja Oriental, so oriental, so eastern sort of Rioja. So that's its new name that we have to call it, although it's not sticking very well. So from La Rioja Baja, we can expect a much more sort of fruitier wines. We've got that influence, that Mediterranean influence. We've got more sunlight, so we can expect a lot more sort of fruit concentration of wines as well. And the soils there are full of clay. I mean, that's why they probably use the red. It's a real sort of reddish color, all the soil in Rioja Baja. Then the final region is Alavesa, which is in green, and where we have, as you can see, Haro, which is one of the very well-known towns of La Rioja, very similar to Rioja Alta in style. There are lots of rolling hills in this region, and regarded as some of the best vineyards in Alavesa as well. Lots of sort of south-facing slopes, maximum sunlight exposure as well. So Rioja Alavesa just tends to be that sort of premium on Rioja Alta wines. Okay, this is some of the wines of Rioja. These are the four wines of Rioja, if you like. 91%, I think it's probably even more than that now, of the plantings of grapes in La Rioja are made up of red wines or red grapes. So that's predominantly most of the wine produced at Rioja is red, over 90%. The Rioja wine regions have actually changed their laws fairly recently. Rioja is always changing as a wine region. It's really exciting, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about it as well. They are now able to label their wines with the name of the village or the vineyard on the bottle. So there's now a new labeling law, very much in the French sort of style that we would see in Bordeaux, for example, or even Burgundy. They're now doing that in Rioja. There are about 145 municipalities of Rioja, and they are now labeling them on bottles as well. So you'll never learn all of them, but it's something new to the Rioja world. So the first wine we've got is the red or tinto, most produced. Second is the rosé, the rosado. So the rosé wines have changed a lot in recent years. If you had a Rioja Rosado 5 years ago, it would have been very dark in color and had that real sort of fruity concentration. Perfectly normal way to make rosé wine. However, the success of wines from, for example, Provence in the south of France, being a really pale rosé, and the marketability of pale rosé on the back of it meant that everybody thought pale rosé equals dry, darker rosés equals sweet. Completely not true in the wine world, but when you're marketing the wine, you need to keep it simple. So that is the message that sort of went across the world, that the lighter the rosé, it sort of meant the better quality and the drier. So they managed to, in Rioja, they started then producing rosés in a much lighter style. So now when you go to the supermarket, you can find some of the main wineries in Rioja producing really light style rosés. And all they do to do that is, with the contact of the skin of the red grape, is they just leave the skin on for a lesser amount of time than they would have done before. And they call that the maceration. So then they're not macerating the grapes as long as they used to. So it's quite an easy process. This is new to Spanish wine, and to Rioja. It's the espumosos, which is the sparkling. This is Rioja's way of competing with cava. Cava can legally and is grown in La Rioja. They can make it in La Rioja. It's not just subject to Catalonia, but Rioja want to make their own sparkling wine that will eventually, I think, probably gain really good recognition, first in Spain and then more internationally. So the espumosos de calidad de Rioja is what they're known as. Very similar style of wine to champagne, made in that traditional method and using pretty much the same grapes. And then there were white wines as well. So white wines in Rioja are becoming increasingly popular, particularly in the UK and the United States. Years ago, in the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, Rioja, white Rioja was always made with oak, and therefore it put a lot of people off because they didn't want that oaky flavour in the wine. Often it was some of the cheaper sort of oaky flavours as well. So now what they're doing is they are unoaking, not making their wines with any oak. And so you get a really clean, easy, refreshing white wine from Rioja. They also changed the law again on Rioja, because it's constantly changing, to say that they can now offer Rioja white wine as a single varietal wine, whereas before it was a blended wine. So that's something to watch out for. You will, if you go to the supermarket and buy Rioja, a white Rioja, I would probably say my best advice is look at the price point. If you're paying more than sort of 13, 14 pounds for a bottle of white Rioja, it's possible that it has been aged and had some oak in it. So if you're looking for that clean, fresh, unoaked style, then go for sort of a Rioja around 10 pounds or less. The main grapes then of Rioja, as you can see from the diagram, of course, is the Tempranillo grape. Tempranillo is our main grape in all our wines that we're all drinking now. There are also other wine grapes. Garnacha is a very popular grape in Rioja. That's just Grenache, the Spanish version of Grenache. Mazuelo is another grape, which is also known as Carignana or Carignan in French. And you've also got Maturana Tinta as well, which is not used as much, but is also a red variety grape. And the white varieties, most of the white wine that you buy from La Rioja is the Biura grape, which is also known as the Macabeo grape in Catalonia. So people may know that grape instead. And you can also have the white Grenache grape as well that can be used. But more recently, since I think it was 2007, they allowed foreign varieties to be used in Rioja winemaking, which this list shows. So you now have Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Verdejo used in the winemaking process in Rioja. So they are not indigenous grapes to Rioja, but they now make those wines with those. Okay, if you go to your labels, then this you will see it was either green, red, purple, or blue. I think someone mentioned they've got a blue label. Oh, okay, we've got a blue label going. That's good. So blue label is our Gran Reserva. We're going to talk about this in a moment, so don't worry. These labels came into Spain, into La Rioja, to stop counterfeit bottles, to stop the production of Rioja coming from other parts of Spain and being sold off in foreign markets. And it was a real problem in Rioja, particularly during the 70s, 80s. So this control method was to not only make sure that the Rioja wine was from Rioja, but also was a sort of stamp of quality to make sure you know that you're having a Rioja wine. And one of the reasons that Rioja wine is so popular across the world is that you know exactly what you're getting with a Rioja wine from its bottle. It tells you all you need to know. And that's what we're going to go through now, just to show you some of the characteristics. So you'll notice you'll either have a word, if you've got a red label or a purple or a blue label, you'll have a word next to it. If you've just got a green label, you won't have anything. And you'll also have a year that says cosecha. That tells you, that means harvest. That's the year that the wine, that the grapes rather, were harvested, okay? So we know exactly if we're buying a wine that's been aged, we know exactly how long, or roughly how long it's been aged for. Okay, so this diagram shows you the 4 different styles of Rioja. So they correspond to the pictures before. If you've got a green label, we're starting off at the bottom of the pyramid with Rioja, also known as generic Rioja or joven. And joven just means young. It doesn't reflect, it's not used on the labels, joven, but it's what they're sort of known as. It's not an official term. These wines are have had minimum aging. They reflect a really sort of fleshy style of wine. They're fruity. The whites from this categorization are very, very popular because they haven't had any aging. That's what we were talking about, not wanting any oak in our wine. So if you're buying a white Rioja or you're drinking a white Rioja, the green label there is really key to know whether it's had any oak or not. So you can use their label system as a way to tell what wine you're buying. The next level up is crianza, and this is showing slightly more quality of a wine, perhaps, not saying that that the other wines in Rioja below don't have any quality. I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. But to fit a crianza, you have to have some aging, and that's a minimum of 2 years. And then what I've done, I've put a barrel and a bottle to show you roughly what they would do with the wines. It has to have a minimum of 1 year in barrel. So they would often put 1 year in barrel, 1 year in bottle aging, and then release it to the market. But of course, they could do 2 years in barrel and perhaps 6 months in bottle, you know, but the minimum requirements are in the boxes next to it to show you that it's 2 years. So that's a crianza. Now, crianza wines, you can expect, obviously, so a little bit of aging starting. It'll be a little bit more complex, the wine. You'll start to see lots of the red fruit flavors becoming a little bit more intense, perhaps. You'll start to have some oak in the wine, of course, so you might have a bit more spice in the wine. The body of the wine increases. You'll have more medium body to sometimes even full body, and your tannins will be sort of medium tanning. So when we were doing that tasting earlier on the cheeks, you would feel that those tannins quite significantly compared to the Rioja joven. Then the reserva, so the reserve wines, the kind of benchmark, or used to be the benchmark of Rioja wines was buying a reserva. They've had 3 years of aging. A minimum has to be 1 year in barrel and half a year in bottle. Okay. The typical makeup of a reserva wine is 1 year in barrel and 2 years in bottle. In the vineyards, in the wineries, they don't want to keep too much wine in the barrels because it requires a lot more attention, but also space, and you want to, be able to produce wine each year. So if you're keeping your wine in your barrels year after year, it's going to take a lot of years and a lot of barrels to get through. So taking the wine out of the barrels, making sure they've had the minimum amount of time, and then moving them into bottles is a preferred choice. With the reserva wines, you're going to get a great balance here now between sort of fruit and the structure of the wine. So that's the tannins and the acidity. There's going to be sort of aging flavors coming through. More spice will be there, but this time maybe some more dried fruit. You'll also depending on the wine where it's from in La Rioja, have a lot more red fruits as well. Even getting some more sort of boiled red fruits as well. They're sort of more intense flavors. You'll find that there's a lot of new oak is used in the Reserva wines, and that really complements the flavor compounds as well. A lot of vanilla, cedar, and smokiness as well in those wines. If you're getting some of those sort of tertiary flavors as well, that's where you'll start to pick up some leather and some more earthy ground flavors from that wine. Okay. So then we've got the Gran Reserva. So if you're on the blue label, you have got one of the longest aged wines in La Rioja. It's aged for 5 years. Okay, minimum 5 years. That's 2 years in barrel and 2 years in bottle. The typical makeup is 2 years barrel, 3 years in the bottle. You're now going to have a much more full-bodied, high-impact wine that's going to really hit you when you drink it. It's going to really sort of warm up your face with all of the flavor compounds working together to create a much more sort of sophisticated wine and more balanced wine as well because of that aging process. There are different rules for white wines and Rioja wines as well. Sorry, and rosé wines. They don't have to follow the same. They don't follow the same processes as the reds. And the aging process here, the classification process here for Rioja, is slightly different to that of the rest of Spain. So in the rest of Spain, the aging processes are slightly less. La Rioja is slightly more. So we just have to bear that in mind as well. Okay. So Tempranillo, that's what we're all drinking. We can see that from Tempranillo. We've looked at the color before. I'd say mine is a sort of medium ruby. If you've got a Gran Reserva, you might be going into that medium sort of garnet color as well. So you can have a look at the color of your wine and see if it matches. And there's a bunch of grapes there as well that reflect the Tempranillo. So in our flavors here, we should be smelling lots of cherry, plums, perhaps some dried fig. If you've got some of the aged wines or some of the reservas or the Gran Reservas, you have some cedar, leather, maybe tobacco. Vanilla, dill is another characteristic as well, and potentially cloves. Tempranillo on its own is a very quite sort of simple grape. It reacts really well to oak, which is why it's used heavily in La Rioja. It doesn't produce a whole lot of sort of body to the wine, which is why then we often mix it with, for example, Grenache in our Riojas to give it that sort of oomph. Grenache works really well in the sun. It needs a lot of sun to grow, so therefore the influence, particularly in Rioja Baja, where they can get some maximum sunlight, really works well with Tempranillo. You can expect sort of the alcohol content of a Tempranillo grape or the Riojas to be between sort of 13 and 14.5. Have a look on the bottle and see what you've got. Mine's 13.5. Tempranillo is not just grown in Spain, although 80% of it is grown in Spain. It's also grown in Portugal, where it's known as Tinta Roriz, which is one of the main 5 grapes in port. It's also known as Arangonés in Portugal as well. Portugal have 100 different names for the same grape. It's also grown a little bit in Argentina. They're using it more there now, and they're experimenting it a lot, particularly with some other grapes and Malbec as well. It's grown in Australia, although not a lot, and it's also grown quite a lot in the USA. So you'll see that grape in quite a few places. So this is some information on the Rioja or the Tempranillo that you're drinking. So we can see the cherries, the dried figs there. You can also see the dryness of the wine, but more importantly, you can see how the body, the tannin, the acidity, and the alcohol are all quite high on that table there. So really showing you that you've got yourself quite a powerful wine with the Riojas, particularly the more it's been aged, the more powerful the wines are going to be. But what makes Riojas amazing, and it's due to the altitude of the vineyards as well, and that influence from the Bay of Biscay, is you're not just going to have full-bodied, heavy wines, but they're going to be smooth, and they're going to be balanced, and they're going to be high acidity as well. It's almost like that cooling effect from the Atlantic, is making sure that there's enough sunlight to ripen the fruit, but then there's that cooling breeze to make sure that the grapes can retain that acidity, which is really, really key. If you haven't got a Rioja, or you're not tasting one this evening and you've never had one before, it's sort of a little bit like, in terms of taste profile, similar to a Cabernet Sauvignon. It works quite similarly in that way. Cabernet Sauvignon is often blended. Tempranillo is often blended as well. Okay. Of course, Rioja, you can buy it in all supermarkets. There are often some really good deals on La Rioja, but what I wanted to just show you here is the vintages of La Rioja, particularly anyone that's interested in buying some Riojas, or some Riojas for some special occasions. These are the vintages that you need to look out for. So 2010 and 2011 were both declared excellent vintages. 2010 more than 2011. I think it scored something like 94, 95 points out of 100 in Rioja from the regulators there, because the wines from 2010 were splendid. The vintage was amazing. They are really ripe wines. They're balanced, they're fresh, and real sort of focused wines as well. So they've got real flavor concentration, the perfect amount of tannins, and everything that you would want from a Rioja. So 2010, if you were to go and buy anything from 2010 from La Rioja, you won't be disappointed. You'll be able to buy Grand Reservas from there. You'll be able to buy Reservas from there. And because it was such a great vintage, you could also keep them yourself and age them. And that goes for the same with 2011. It was a really good season as well. And some more later seasons, 2015, 2016, we had real 2 years in Spain of hot, dry summers. So we had some real structured wines coming out of Rioja, and a great sort of year for that balance of wine. Warm summers, enough rain in the spring as well, to make sure that the balance of water and sunlight. The harvest was not too late. The harvest wasn't too early. It was all perfect in those years. And most recently, 2019 was also a brilliant year for La Rioja, because it was a very warm year as well. So you'll start to see 2019 Riojas soon. Obviously, they won't be available yet if they are going through the aging processes. And just to go back, I was going to mention, with the aging processes, with the Rioja Joven, or the generic Riojas, a lot of winemakers in Rioja don't want to age their wine for that many years, or for that, for a minimum of 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, or whatever. But the wines are still amazing quality. And therefore, if they choose not to age them for those minimum time periods, they have to classify the wine as a Rioja, generic Rioja, green label, or a Joven. Even though it might not be a Joven, they won't even use that term Joven, but you can still get amazing wines that have the green label. The other thing is that the wine from Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva, you have to age in barrels, in oak barrels of 225 litres. And a lot of winemakers are moving away from that traditional French style of making wine, that sort of Bordeaux style. And therefore, they are changing the way that they are aging and how they're aging their wines as well. So if they don't fall into that category, then they have to put it into that classification. So don't be fooled by thinking if it's a green label, it's necessarily a lower quality Rioja, because it's not the case. Equally, if you find a Rioja with a green label and it's priced at sort of 30, 40, 50 pounds, then it will still, don't think it, you're being ripped off. Just remember that the process, the aging process, or the wine production there will be slightly different, and it will still be an amazing wine. So that's just something to bear in mind. The other thing, if you're buying your wine and you want to age some yourself, keep them lying down in a cellar or in your cupboards or wine racks, then when you try a wine, before committing to buying cases or a case or whatever, always do the tasting that we did at the beginning. Make sure you give it a really, really good taste, smell, and on the palate, because what you're looking for here is flavor compounds. The more flavor compounds, so the more of the fruit flavors that we looked at in the wheel at the beginning, the more of those that you can taste in the wine or smell in the wine, the more likely it has for aging, the higher the potential for aging those wines. So as a rule that I would give, you need to have at least 5 different flavor compounds, flavor characteristics in the wine before deciding whether it can be worthy of aging. The other factor, if you don't want to do all of that first, is the price. If you're buying a bottle of Rioja for less than £10 and you buy it in 2019 and you keep it for 15 years, don't expect it to have aged well, because that wine is probably designed to drink there and then. So again, with the price there, always think about if you're going to keep a wine and age it for a special occasion in years to come, think about the price a little bit, but also think about those flavor compounds and characteristics when you're tasting and smelling the wine. And that brings it to a close. I've got an Instagram page, it's called Great Press. I'm starting to do a Where Wine When, www. It's basically telling you where to buy wine in the UK, so basically when it's on offer, and when to buy it, so when the offers are on as well. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. I've kept it to just under 45 minutes, which was my target. Thanks for tuning in. If you like it, let me know, and I'll do another one on a different wine or something else. Have a good evening and continue enjoying the lockdown that we're in. I'll just close this down now to see if there's any questions. Okay, I'm drinking Targa. I don't know if you can see that on there, which is a Graciano grape led. So it's actually not a Tempranillo led grape. And it's a green label, but it's a really good wine. It's really, really easy drinking, fresh, and very, very tasty. So that's what I'm drinking. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the question bar. I'll just stick around for a few more minutes. Oh, and happy birthday to James for tomorrow. Okay, cool. There's no more questions coming in, so that's good. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Take care, and I shall see you all soon. Cheers.